Hello and welcome to all of our Padawan learners out there. We're continuing with the prologue of our Star Wars fanfic. I don't know what else to say here, but this is technically the third chapter. It's going to be considerably shorter, thank heavens. And it's dubbed Innocence End, because it's the end of Talon's innocence to an extent. It was a week before Talon once again saw Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, and when he did, they were different, angry. He had heard of their return from Fergus, who was a favorite of Saesee Tiin, whom he hoped would choose him as his Padawan learner. Therefore, I think that was a typo on Saesee Tiin is actually. I think that's isn't that a Zabrak Jedi? I can't remember. It's been years since I wrote this. Therefore, the 9-year-olds who had been busy with an errand near the council room raced over to the dining hall, interrupting Talon and his friend's midday meal as he did so. Okay, I think there was some typos in that sentence.
Yeah.
And so he laid in wait for them once his classes and meditation studies had been brought to an end. Or most of the meditation studies had ended. I think he had skipped. He had skipped 2 sessions. Yeah, he did. Simply to go wait for Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon. With Celia out of the temple on yet another of her solo missions, this had left him with no adults to spend time with. This time, though, Yvette came with him. The 2 younglings were just on the verge of leaving for their evening meal when the 2 Jedi stepped out, doing something that Talon had never heard them doing before. Arguing bitterly. Obi-Wan was saying wearily,
"Don't defy the council, Master."
Nope. Remember in the movie, he said it in a more weary tone.
"Don't defy the council, Master. Not again."
"I will do what I must, Obi-Wan. Would you have me be any other way?" Qui-Gon retorted, a certain coldness beneath the surface, even as he disagreed sharply.
"Master, you could be sitting on the council by now if you would just follow the code. You deserve to be sitting on the council. They will not go along with you this time,"
Obi-Wan said in frustration, a certain hardness in his eyes and under the surface on his part too now. "You still have much to learn, my young Padawan," Qui-Gon said, then smiled. It wasn't a warm one, though. It wasn't cold. It just lacked closeness. It was almost sad. Wide-eyed by this breakdown in communication between them, Talon stared at them, having never believed such a thing could be possible. It was painful to hear and see. A blade in the gut would have hurt less than the searing agony that was seeing his 2 heroes speak in such a manner to one another. He could feel the frustration and hurt pouring off of Obi-Wan, the cold rage and frustration of Qui-Gon. "Talon," Qui-Gon said suddenly, noticing him from where he was on the terrace. "And Yvette, what are you 2 doing here?" Talon was too struck for words. Thankfully, Yvette was there and was no such thing.
We came to see you, Master Jin."
"Well, you have seen me, and now must go." The tone Jin used was an irritated, flat one that could have cut through a sieve, just as easily as through the 2 initiates' courage.
"We also came to see Obi-Wan,"
Talon piped up, his voice little more than a pathetic squeak. "You have seen him also," was the short reply.
Master, it is fine. I'll see to them,"
Obi-Wan retorted, sliding away from his master's side to follow after the 2 younglings, whom he took by the shoulders.
Come along." "Come along."
Such was the firmness in his voice and manner that neither of them questioned nor considered it. Glancing over his shoulder, Talon could see Qui-Gon looking at Obi-Wan resentfully, with a touch of hurt himself now, and genuine sorrow.
"Why were you 2 fighting?"
the younger Kenobi asked the elder, looking up at him for answers as he always did when Celia was not around, or when it became an issue of great complexity. He could not puzzle out the solution on his own.
We were
Well, here Obi-Wan seemed to hesitate before he sighed.
discussing something of great import to the Order, something which Qui-Gon prefers to plead ignorance of when it looks him square in the eye, as always. "Are you 2 no longer friends?"
This time it was Yvette's frightened turn to ask a question.
No, we still are. We couldn't break a friendship.
We wouldn't.
We wouldn't break a friendship over such a thing.
Now, 1 second. I just have to do one quick thing. It's just seems that there's some. All right. Obi-Wan lied. It was enough to satisfy the Twi'lek. However, to Talon's ears, his every word rang false. He wished he could have purged the past few minutes from his memories. After Yvette had been dropped off at her quarters, and Obi-Wan was absent-mindedly guiding Talon towards his own, he looked up at the serious-faced young man. He was nervous about asking any more questions, such as what this great matter was. If Qui-Gon didn't like Talon anymore, too. If there was anything he could do to solve the problem. Times like these, Talon wished he could be more like Celia or Yvette. They always seemed to know when to talk, when not to, what to say, and what not to say. He felt like an idiot in comparison to them. At times like these, especially with someone so important to him. Now, remember, not with that other voice he used.
Do you still love Master Qui-Gon?
He finally blurted out, as he always did, whenever something truly bothered him.
Of course.
Obi-Wan replied at once, his face creasing a little in concern and confusion.
Why wouldn't I anymore? But you were fighting. Just because we fought doesn't mean we don't love each other anymore. I will always love him, and he I. It is simply that. It is simply that we disagree. You can disagree yet still adore someone. It is only logical that we all behave differently and therefore clash given the nature of the galaxy.
Obi-Wan explained straightly, as they came to a stop.
Oh, so kind of like Kreia thinking he doesn't sleep in meditation classes when I know he does?
Talon said, trying to find an example. His made Obi-Wan chuckle a little. The sound was akin to music to his ears. It had been so long since he had heard a surprised chuckle from his hero that it surprised him a little.
Yes, I suppose. Though do not tell Kreia you've noticed this habit of his anymore, as such things can grow irritating to hear over and over again.
Obi-Wan corrected him with a loud chortle. He privately marked it in his memory that, when all else failed at tense moments, when there was sorrow to be had, humor was useful and could cheer people up. It worked with Obi-Wan, just as it usually did with Celia, he mused.
Can I visit Master Qui-Gon tomorrow to apologize?
No. This time, the seriousness returned. Here, the senior Padawan learner bent down to one knee to put his arms on the child's shoulders to emphasize his point.
You won't do any such thing, Talon. You did nothing wrong. If anyone should apologize, it should be Qui-Gon. Do you understand me? Never apologize for how you feel toward... how you feel towards someone, unless it is in anger or hatred. Yeah. And even these feelings should be accepted before you banish them from you. What would Suki say? We're only beings, therefore perfection is too...
No, not that voice.
We're only beings, therefore perfection is too much to expect.
Talon recited dutifully, his mind grappling with the notion of Qui-Gon owing him an apology, and being wrong about something. If anything, this notched up Obi-Wan in his mind, as possibly wiser than the old master, as there was no other explanation for why he would know something that Qui-Gon didn't.
Good,
Obi-Wan said with a small smile and a nod.
Now it is time for you to gather your things, eat, meditate, then sleep.
It wasn't until much later, not the next day, but the one after that, Talon went looking for Qui-Gon. He had been busy the previous day with new lessons, as he was beginning an intensified series of piloting lessons, much to his joy. They were difficult for the 6-year-old, yet exciting, and he ended up begging Yoda to replace one of his meditation classes with it, and failed. To his alarm, Yoda was in no mood to argue and chose to cut his pleas down with a short and cold rebuttal. Meditate more, you need. More important than learning to travel it is. Now go meditate for another hour, you will. This reaction threw him off. He hadn't expected it, and it left him wondering if everyone in the temple had gone daft in the past few days. He therefore had gone looking for Qui-Gon. The next day, what with how he had to live down Yoda's punishment in the hopes of talking to the human master. He sought him out in his quarters. He was actually on the verge of knocking and had hesitated, fearful he'd bring down upon him the master's wrath again, as it was evening. The door slid open to his surprise. He barely restrained a small squeak, and when he looked up at the master, he once again sported an annoyed expression. Yes? The one word cut him down, just as the few words had 2 days before. Talon fled instantly. Talon, wait! Turning the corner, the small child felt his lungs leaving him in heavy pants as he went straight for the room of 1,000 fountains. His favorite place to go when he was in trouble. He had thought he had left Qui-Gon behind him, but yeah. Alright, you can run quite swiftly, because Qui-Gon here catches up to him. The description, there's a paragraph in between, but it's not very well written. And it's a bunch of jumbled bad sentences and notes. Yeah, one of these sort of things where I'll deal with it later, and later happened to be never. Qui-Gon remarked from behind him, when popping up out of nowhere, scaring the child once more. You wish to speak to me, Talon? Talon replied unintelligibly, unable to find his voice as Jin still appeared fairly tense. What's the matter? Qui-Gon asked, only to narrow his eyes and then widen them a little. A look of shame overcame him then. You were frightened.
No.
The infant mentally cursed at how his voice shook then. Why? Qui-Gon wondered curiously, if a bit distractedly. Cornered and unsure of what to say or do, the child swallowed deeply as he weighed his options and how to answer this question.
You're mad.
I'm not, Qui-Gon replied, only for comprehension to enter his eyes, and he seemed to return to the Qui-Gon Talon knew, had grown up admiring. The regretful look returned. Does this have to do with the other day, when Obi-Wan and I were fighting? The child nodded. Jin sighed gustily. Talon, I reacted badly towards you. I was merely exasperated with Obi-Wan, not yourself.
Exasperated means you were angry with him, right?
Talon replied. He knew the word, had learned it recently from Master Windu, who had described Master Voss as this very word. A little. However, simply because we fight, or have had one argument, will not change how we feel, or whether we get on. And it has nothing to do with you, nor does it change how much we care for you. Clear? Qui-Gon said frankly to him.
Yes, I hope so, Master.
Talon murmured earnestly.
You're my favorite master after all, more than even Master Windu, though please don't tell him that.
I should hope so. I am glad we are friends once more. Here Jin's wry humor came back, along with a small bit of warmth. You have a kind spirit. Never lose it, and never forget your curiosity, Talon. It does you a world of good, and is your most charming characteristic. Talon nodded, as Qui-Gon placed a warm hand on his head, with one of the most compassionate and loving smiles the child had ever seen. It was a few days later that Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan were gone, back to Naboo. Not that Talon really paid it much mind. It still bothered him a little, but he was busy, beginning an intensified series of lessons, both physical and mental. Talon felt himself wearing down a little. Exhausted every night for almost a week, he simply told himself they'd both be back to normal upon their return. And we have...
That's what happens at 6.
Melira informed him, as though she were all-knowing, when they had paused to eat their evening meals.
They switched some of your lessons and intensified them. Soon they'll put even more history and political lessons on top of the piloting and physical exercises.
It is certainly wearying at first. However, you'll soon adapt, or fail, fall behind, and not be chosen. Fergus added bluntly, not one to mince words. Yeah. Honestly, I think Celia minces words more than him. That's me commenting that. Wow, I really wrote him as being pretty obnoxious. Like, wow, he must be Irish.
And her pretty snobby.
Yeah. She's a little girl. All little girls are snobby.
Indeed.
Not one to mince words. He shrugged from where he sat next to Gurion's left-hand side, eating rapidly and deeply. A big eater, Fergus was another human from the core. though where Talon felt some curiosity for the galaxy and where he came from, particularly the Senate and his Dream Lady, and whomever the Dream Jedi were, Fergus felt nothing. He remembered nothing of his family and felt nothing towards them. When Talon had asked in confusion once why this was, the dark-featured boy had answered in his usual crisp manner. Because we'll likely never have contact. It doesn't matter. I'm to be a Jedi. And what are they to be? Miners? Farmers? Politicians? No. It doesn't matter. What matters is the Force. Our training. Our studies. And nothing else. Put family out of your mind, Talon. They aren't worth the effort. As we have a different path than they, as Master Yoda and Windu would remind you. The boy's kind of cold. But he is kind of right. Actually, I think when I'm looking at this quote, it reminds me of something Musashi once said. So, I think there's a bit of a perfectionist. That was the idea behind that character. If I remember correctly. There's a lot of things I forgot about the character.
You don't have to be so mean, Fergus. We're just tired.
Yvette scolded him, leaning her head against Talon's as she commiserated with him. Gurion grunted his agreement as he sleepily blinked his eyes. I wasn't being mean, just stating the truth. You should see how much the 12-year-olds study, or how much Olin does, as the masters give him a lot of extra studies and work, because of expectation. If you think you have a lot to do now, just wait another 6 years, when you must also stress yourselves in regards to the crunch. Fergus warned tartly. As always, he was a little grim and too serious for Melira and Yvek's tastes. Talon liked his honesty and intelligence, though. Normally he took his words with the utmost seriousness. But not now. Now he wanted sleep, and that was all. Crunch. And the Wookiee asked in the growl of his people, his tone a confused one.
He's referring to the scramble for a master.
Melira translated absent-mindedly as she polished off her plate, only to notice Mikran eating a little more slowly.
Eat up, Mikran. You need to help eat more. Should I get you some more?
I'm fine, the blonde girl replied calmly, as she shyly asked Talon, who was seated across from her. Will you be all right?
Come on, Mikran. You'll need to eat more. Come on, Mikran. You'll need to eat more than that if you want to get stronger and beat Olin.
Melira huffed, not liking having to share her bestie's attention with anyone else, even after several years of doing just that. She's so needy. She's like a puppy. I'm just saying. I don't think that was the original idea in the RP with her, but this shows a different flavor of the character, I think.
It allows us to take a look at her 10 years later.
Yeah, from a different angle. I don't mind not beating him. He's undefeated now, and I prefer to study and beat him at philosophy anyways. It's easier. Mikran retorted with a pout. Okay, I didn't read that right. I don't mind not beating him. He's undefeated, and I prefer to study and beat him at philosophy anyways. It's easier, Mikran retorted with a pout as she glanced back at her friend.
Eat up, though.
No, it's Fergus here. Eat up, though. You'll need all your strength. Fergus encouraged also, his tone slightly gentler than it was before. We will. And here it's Yvek.
When is Master Qui-Gon coming back? I heard from Master Shen that Obi-Wan will finally be going through the trials now. Trials soon.
Yvek spoke up, summoning up some last bit of strength to eat and gossip a bit.
He is?
Talon asked with a note of excitement. If that was the case, it meant that Obi-Wan was likely to take on a Padawan soon. Maybe even after he returned directly from Naboo. Oh, isn't this kid in for a disappointment? Suddenly visions of the two of them adventuring throughout the stars, of having a master before his peers, before even Fergus or Ferris Olin, flared up in his mind. He swelled up emotionally as he remembered the promise from months ago, a secret one between him and Obi-Wan.
Yeah, so what?
Melira grunted indifferently.
It's also rumored that Master Jin wants to replace Obi-Wan Kenobi, as though he's not good enough for him anymore.
What a jerk.
I heard he said so.
I'm referring to her as a jerk. Like, wow. She's terrible.
I heard he said so to the council. At least it's what Master Windu was complaining about a few days ago to Master Brandir.
Now, real quick to all the fans, Brandir is remember Kyrus from the previous video? The old Celestin Jedi? Well, he's Brandier, so his name was Kyrus Brandier. With Brandier, the word being coming from the term branded. So, I played with the word branded, and the idea here is that he's kind of branded, in a way, Kyrus. So he's a branded Chiron figure. So, I know it's a little on the nose there. But the idea was that the Brandier is about Dooku's age, and so Windu was kind of complaining to someone who's old enough to be his father. Windu, the thing is, was friends with a lot of Jedi from different generations. So he doesn't usually vent, but that's usually to only those like Obi-Wan Kenobi or Plo Koon that he's close to. So this was meant to elevate Kyrus as a truly wise and great Jedi.
That's a lie!
Yvette called out, horrified.
He'd never do that or say such a thing. Hey, I heard it from Master Windu.
It isn't fair to any of them to discuss such a thing in such a manner, Fergus corrected everyone sharply, as always behaving as though he were the adult out of all of them.
You're not my boss,
Lyra cried out. Please, Melira, maybe Master Jin simply feels Obi-Wan is ready and wishes to choose a new one, right after he passes the trials, Mikran suggested mildly.
You think so?
Yvette asked hopefully. Talon could guess what she was thinking, as he was thinking the exact same thing. She was expecting Jin to choose her. Yeah, he thinks it'd be perfect. His head full of visions of it already. There was supposed to be his thoughts there. I'm just skipping over it, because for brevity's sake. Their discussion ended shortly thereafter, with most of them heading off to sleep, or for extra classes in the case of Fergus and the two older girls. Gurion headed off to go draw by himself in his quarters. Okay, I think that was our oldest brother's suggestion that Gurion was an artist? I don't remember that being part of his character.
You know what? I like that.
Yeah. Actually, a Wookiee artist. That is so weird to think about. It actually adds a flavor to his character. I like it. Yeah, I like it as well. Well, Talon accompanied Yvette to the fountains, to their favorite spot. Okay, sorry, real quick. Bear in mind, this was written like 15 years ago. I don't remember what I was thinking when I wrote that. Did it just come out naturally, or did I pre-plan that? Normally, I remember things really, really well in detail, but here
Sometimes when you write, there's small details that come out that you don't think about.
True. Maybe it was like that. Normally, I remember exactly what I was thinking when I was writing.
Hence why I say...
Maybe this just came out.
You don't write the story. You let the story write itself.
Yeah, that's probably what happened here. I was very inexperienced when writing the story, but I think this was something that the story itself wrote. Where they always either sat on a rock together near the bend of one of the... Yeah, this is Talon and Yvette. Of one of the rivers where they had once gathered rocks years ago. It was their spot.
Do you think Master Jin will choose me?
Yvette asked him after a long moment where Talon nearly dozed off. Starting a little more awake, he answered instantly.
I hope so. I know it actually. It'll be perfect.
Yeah, I'm just going to skip a bit of this scene. It's not well written. They bond over what they believe is, well, yeah, and where the most notable piece of dialogue, though, because is about how they swear they'll always be friends, and she tells Talon that he's her best friend and she'll love him forever. Now, Talon doesn't think too much on it, and this is where they fall asleep innocently, and yeah, this scene just becomes a little more... Mostly it's the dialogue, I just worry sometimes, but I want you to know, in case and in spite of if we ever fight like Master Jin and Obi-Wan, you're my best friend, I love you now and forever. This dialogue, I remember I was going to use later, I think it comes up later, in a later chapter, in a dark way. So, you'll have to wait a few weeks for that. Talon was pleased to hear that in the middle of the night, Celia had returned to the temple. She hadn't visited him like she always did, the moment when she got back, due to the late hour. While she came back, several council members, including Masters Windu and Yoda, left for Naboo. This shot up rumors and concern throughout the temple, with rumors of Sith circulating about now, too. Celia assured Talon that there was absolutely nothing to worry about, and even showed him a few Form 5 katas to cheer him up, as she demonstrated to him a certain parry and counter-strike move from Jen So, that is to say, Anakin in Celia's style. Although Celia was also knew Shien. Anakin was not as skilled with Shien as he was Jimso. He fought back on his discussion with Vivek and the fight between Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, still unresolved when they had left the temple.
Theory?
He asked to get her attention, a little distracted by his own heavy thoughts. Yeah, Talon, she replied, as she repositioned his arms, pulled one of his feet forward, leaving him uncomfortably stretched out, and had him raise his chin and straighten his back properly for the move. Now, this pose here I based off an actual sword pose I had learned in Japan and whatnot. But I was also basing it off of the kind of elevated stance that Windu took against Palpatine at one point when they just stare each other down and raise their blades and go to swing at each other. We all know the scene. And because it's based off an actual kata, and I learned that kata in Japan, but you're not supposed to bend the blade almost behind your head. It's actually supposed to be high up, overhead. And it was a great move, and yeah. While I was in Japan, I became very passionate about swordsmanship, and I was taught quite a bit of swordsmanship. Funny enough, in Japan, it's almost more a female passion, swords. I mean, at least Iaido lessons. But there was plenty of boys in the club, and I bonded with a lot of the boys and a lot of the girls as well. It was a very friendly and warm atmosphere, rather like a Jedi classroom. Is Obi-Wan... Oh, right. That's you.
Is Obi-Wan your best friend?
Yes, not shy about asking weightier personal questions of her, as he had long since grown overly comfortable in her presence. She was his favorite Jedi. Well, her and Obi-Wan. Yeah, I guess so. Why do you ask? Celia replied casually as she nodded to herself. All right, now parry and right, now left. Then it is, yes, like that, now stab. No, not like that, a little higher. For a few moments, they dwelt upon the kata. It was difficult, yet they made their way through it. I just have to check something. Yeah. Determinedly together, just as they tackled all issues together. She being his greatest teacher, his most ardent supporter, and he hers. Supporter, that is. Which was why when they broke for a short break... Okay, that sentence is weird. He continued with his line of questions. Do you two fight a lot? Oh, shoot, that's you. Sorry.
Do you two fight a lot?
Here, Celia became serious. Drinking from a water canteen, she paused to regard him. Why do you ask? Talon? Unable to lie to her, he explained everything. Starting with Qui-Gon's return, the fight Vivek and he had eavesdropped on, and the rumors that had begun to circulate recently regarding the Jedi team. When he had finished, Celia looked less than pleased. In fact, she looked a little angry. Enough to worry the boy.
Celia?
He wondered in concern.
Are you all right?
No, she grumbled back. Jin dares to treat you in such a manner.
He apologized.
Talon reiterated emphatically, alarmed at the anger lacing her voice now. Doesn't matter, Celia snapped furiously. It is one thing for him to always treat Obi-Wan like this, and to take advantage of him constantly. An entirely different one to treat children like that. Oh, no, wait. I think I should have worded it as... if I had edited it, it would have been an entirely different one to treat younglings like that. Yeah, that was a mistake on my part. A typo at the time. He should be stripped of the status of master. Sometimes I swear, he is a bigger hypocrite than his own master. Nervous and a little scared to have brought her ire down upon Qui-Gon, he swore he'd do something to soothe her before Qui-Gon's return, as he didn't want her fighting him too. He knew the two, and knew that even were Obi-Wan to help Qui-Gon, Celia would mop the floor of both of them teaming up, with the blade and otherwise. Sometimes it seems like that way. It doesn't mean it is your fault. Okay, this sentence was worded so weirdly. Basically, she tells Talon it's not his fault, it is Qui-Gon's, is all. Yeah, it's just a wording I'm just confused by. She told him a heartbeat later, still looking a little mad.
Do you feel this way because you love Obi-Wan? That you said those things about Master Qui-Gon and him?
Talon asked shyly, not comfortable around her anger. Of course, and because I love you, Celia retorted. Her matter-of-factly words warmed him instantly and made him forget all about the issue of Qui-Gon, at least for the moment. Come now, we have training to do, and there are 2 more katas I want you to figure out before the end of the next hour and a half. And I now have steam to blow off also, she then added to herself. Once he returns, there will be words, especially regarding his treatment of Kenobis. I've been diplomatic and peaceful long enough.
Perhaps meditation would work better for you,
he suggested innocently. Just do the move and leave the smarminess to Obi-Wan. He's much more annoying when he does it. Whereas you just come across as a know-it-all. She scolded him without bite or iciness. Yeah. Talon, as a character, was meant to be a bit of a know-it-all when he acted smarmy. Obi-Wan does have a know-it-all smarmy side, but to Silly, I think Obi-Wan's more annoying than know-it-all and condescending. Obi-Wan is very condescending in the movies.
Yes.
Especially in episode 2. In there, he's just outright cruel sometimes when he's condescending and patronizing. Talon was always meant to be a bit of a know-it-all, like, hey, I know more than you. In a similar way as Obi-Wan, but without being too condescending. He was also meant to be a bit obnoxious later on. So we're starting to see spades of that. He has a bit of silly in him in regard to his characterization, and it's starting to crop up here. And the only thing is, where Anakin was to try to model himself after Qui-Gon, not always in a positive way, Talon would kind of try to model himself after Silly, I think, in some ways. It was the next day that the ship, as well as Obi-Wan, I guess. It was the next day that the ship carrying the council back arrived. Their mood, though, sparked even more rumors, namely how grim they were, and how they weren't accompanied by Master Qui-Gon Jinn. Further, it appeared that Obi-Wan had lost his Padawan braid, which could mean only one thing. Fergus had informed Talon, keeping him informed of the council's doings as always. Expectation loomed before the young boy. It was more than he could breathe for him. Okay, the sentence is so weird. He waited for a visit from Obi-Wan. None came. At all. And what was worse was the new rumors of Qui-Gon and what had happened to him. He also chose to ignore the rumors of a new addition to the upper initiate classrooms, in the form of some boy found by Qui-Gon, and already chosen by Obi-Wan as his pupil. Waiting half a week impatiently, patience being a virtue he still struggled with, Talon waited until after one of the meditation sessions with Yoda, before approaching him, with Yvek eyeing him speculatively, and Gurion hurrying out before he could be held up over his sleeping habit. Sorry, that's funny. Master Yoda? Oh, shoot. Why do I keep doing that?
Master Yoda?
Talon inquired curiously, observing and analyzing in his own way the elderly master's tired profile and expression. He had always been exhausted and sorrowful, yet recently this countenance had worsened. Yes, young one, Yoda replied. No, weren't you doing Yoda and I'm doing Yaddle?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, I am messing up today. Sorry.
Yes, young one?
Yoda replied, hobbling forward, stooping forward as he did so with an eye on the entrance, clearly impatient to go to his next appointment.
Where is Master Jin?
The words felt torn from his lips, and the Green Master eyed him quizzically, his expression shifting to a pitying one. He placed one hand on Talon's shoulder. A recent growth spurt had left him taller than the Master. Sorry.
One with the Force he has become,
Yoda explained gently, yet his words were received with no such reception. It took the whole of a minute before the lad was able to translate them. It took the whole of his suddenly numbed mind, not numbed because of the evening hour, but because of the late hour. Oh, my gosh. But because of what it was he had just heard. How could he breathe, think, or live again after hearing such ridiculous news? Yoda's eyes did not lie. His heart ticked. His heartbeat ticked. I can't read the sentence. It's so bad. Yeah, I was so young back then. Mouth gaped open. When he finally responded, he felt an explosion of pain arc through him as he sensed with the Force as he reached out with the Force to sense the truth behind Yoda's words. He couldn't fathom it, couldn't imagine it. Qui-Gon was a legendary bladesman and master, a hero, an invincible man. He had seemed gentle, wise, kind, if ill-tempered sometimes, and a bit world-weary. Nonetheless, he was supposed to live forever. Now, real quick, I'll actually say Qui-Gon Jinn is a little ill-tempered by nature, and wise and whatnot. One need only look at Qui-Gon's tantrum in the council chamber room scene. Yeah, should not have done that in front of Anakin, like such a young child. But Talon wished he could say he handled things well, but he didn't. He still had 2 more classes after this one, but crushed by this piece of knowledge that didn't click into his brain until much later, he fled, determined to find the truth, stubbornly refusing to believe it. Evidence pointed, in his opinion, to this simply being a trick, or Jin simply being undercover or something. He knew someone who wouldn't lie to him, someone who knew the truth. However, he wanted to see with his own two eyes. A mischievous soul by nature, he had a meticulous mind when push came to shove. And as he passed Yvette, he ignored her questioning glance. This wasn't a job for her. She had no taste for rule breaking. He went straight for Gurion. Pulling on his arm, he spoke to him gently.
Come on, I need to get something from the... Come on, I need to get something from the archives.
If there was a recording of some sort, it'd be in the archive memory. Stored there by the countless droids, archive staff, and Madame Jocasta knew, the stern-faced archivist who confused and irritated Talon on the best of days. Why are we going there? Gurion asked, confused.
Because I needed a distraction. I want archive files, and I want to get them onto my datapad without Madame New being the wiser.
Ugh, I hate being a distraction, Gurion complained irritably. Does this have to do with Master Kenobi's behavior recently, or is it Master Tachi today?
Jin.
No, determined.
Jin.
There. Okay, much better. It was all they said, with the Wookiee not questioning his ill mood all the way there. He remained silent, and for this, Talon was grateful. He had no wish to talk, as he focused his mind on Nu. She didn't trust him, not since he had tried to sneak off with a Jedi holocron last year. I could see why. Sorry, that's me commenting. Wow.
Yeah.
He had heard at the time of the wisdoms of Grandmasters Kaiku and odan-urr, so I tried to make off with the former's holocron, only to be caught, screamed at, even as he defiantly refused to accept punishment at the time, and still couldn't understand why nobody was allowed near the ancient masters. It always felt as though Yoda and the Council were hiding something by keeping them away from others. This was exactly how he currently felt. With their arrival, Gurion looked at him questioningly, with Talon thinking rapidly.
Go ask someone for access to Master Jin's mission files. I can figure out the rest. I know the mission numbers and how to gain access.
True, he was not in the upper years computer slicing classes, but he was one of the top members in his age group. Gurion did so, with Talon keeping back a little, as one of the apprentices of the archives, a Padawan left behind or with a deceased master who was temporarily on archive duty. Normally, Talon would love to dilly-dally in the archives, as it was his second favorite place in the temple. Being a center of knowledge, of learning, with all the answers in the galaxy right there, he was oftentimes overtly excited for Madame Nu's severe, in critical ways. What? I can't grasp that sentence. Anyways, soon he saw his opening, as Gurion got the computer terminal open, only to distract the impatient apprentice with a different request, hurrying while trying to seem as though he weren't. Just as his Jedi training had ingrained in him, he slipped into the cushioned seat. The first thing he found was that the mission reports were organized slightly more complexly than expected. It took him a few minutes to figure out where everything was. Rather than being in chronological order, someone, he had a good guess too, had organized them with a certain letter combined with numbers to form a semi-alphabetized and semi-numerical order structure. Then combine this with the systems and planets' numbers from Coruscant's quadruple zero hyperdrive code. After this was thrown the year of discovery of said planet.
Why doesn't Madame Nu just put them in order of years of Master Jin's life in order of where he went?
Talon wondered, confused by her thinking and hating her even more. After a few minutes of migraine-induced searching, he figured it out after finding a mission right there on Coruscant, and then on neighboring Korleg, when Jin was a Padawan himself. When he came up to Naboo, though, the file was already slightly locked up. This was done so that only Knights and Masters could access certain files. Trouble was, Talon knew what the key number and identification number of Bant Irin was. The gentle Mon Calamari healer had always trusted him a tad too much, and it was a trait that he and Yvette were prone to take advantage of. He had discovered it when he had had her access a few of Obi-Wan's mission files when he was assigned a project on Findar's new democratic government structure. The key number worked. Having passed the trials 5 years ago, Band had more access than Obi-Wan did. Weird to Talon's thinking, but he brushed it off. Soon he moved the file to his datapad to observe it later. It would involve mission reports, updates, and even recordings if there were any on the planet. "What do we have here?" a disapproving female voice said from behind him. Okay, I think I sounded too much like Mortimer the Rat. Like, ha-cha-cha. Okay.
Like a combination between Mortimer and McGonagall from Harry Potter.
Yeah, I think I should probably sound more like McGonagall. But then again, without McGonagall's brain, because Madame Nu's not terribly bright.
I mean, we've mentioned how she organized the archive.
I just remember that the archives, Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon were able to access information easily in the Jedi Apprentice era. Then when she became archivist, they were like, "We give up. We can't access stuff. It's too complicated. I'm not doing it."
They'd call her and ask her, "Okay, we need information on this," and she'd lecture them.
Yeah, and the trouble is, Windu didn't even do it. So Windu and Obi-Wan, who are the two smartest people in the entire galaxy, they did have the highest IQ, were going, "I can't figure this out." But it's one of those things where you have to be a total genius or an idiot to do it. Trying to access...
Madame Nu,
Talon said with false innocence and oiliness.
"Your hair looks nice today."
"Trying to access files you are not privy to again?" she demanded coldly. He briefly wondered if she had ever felt warmth or kindness in her life, and if she was deep down a programmed droid the council had built to manage the archives. She referred, in any case, to the blank mission listings Talon had exited to seconds before. Go.
Sorry, I couldn't help but laugh at the description.
She just has no human emotions in the novels.
"Nope,"
he retorted as he did the first thing he could think to do. Run! He had observed without seeming to, another basic Jedi lesson, Gurion, who was in the clear and not under suspicion. "Come back here," Nu ordered crisply. However, Talon would not listen to her. He had what he wanted. Once in the clear, he sent a message by comlink to Gurion, letting him know he had what he wanted. He closed it and hurried to his quarters, feeling gleeful for a little bit, pleased by how efficiently he had maneuvered his way to getting the files he wanted. Once in his quarters, he accessed his datapad, just as the door slid shut behind him. The first thing he brushed past were the minuscule number of reports and updates. Suspicious that since it was only a recently completed mission, and that this was why there were so few of those, he skipped them. Jin was a master. Surely he knew the importance of checking in with the council. Anyways, little does Talon know that Qui-Gon had special permission that he didn't have to do that. And I say special permission because he supposedly broke the rules and laws as he pleased, but in reality, Yoda basically gave him a blank check to do whatever he wanted. And this is something that Addy confirms in one of the Jedi Apprentice books. And Yoda confirms at one point, and Mace Windu confirms. Obi-Wan actually was the bigger rule breaker. It's just Obi-Wan was clever about hiding it, contrary to Jin, who was very obvious. Which, the difference is, Obi-Wan was so good at hiding it. Anakin, Qui-Gon, everybody thought he was a rule follower. Obi-Wan's just smarter.
A wolf in sheep's clothing, as one would describe it.
Yeah, that is Obi-Wan Kenobi. Anyways, Talon had found the lists of recordings, mostly ship ones, a few seized from the Trade Federation and one listed simply as Naboo Reactor. He accessed this one last recording. All of them showed him proof positive of his beliefs regarding Jin. Until 10 minutes later, then he bore witness to something that made him physically ill. Now, here's the thing. It's actually confirmed, I think in the Last of the Jedi novels, or novellas, I can't remember where, but I do know that the Naboo battle was, the recordings were seized. The Naboo government agreed to delete them. Now, Palpatine actually saw the recordings and was infuriated that Maul lost in that way to Kenobi. The Jedi Council saw it and reviewed it, and it's what made them decide that Obi-Wan should become a knight because he had given it. He used the dark side, then gave it up and access to light. So this is a recording that's actually very important and is a very important plot point in universe. So before you guys think there's Deus Ex Machina, remember the Naboo arc reactor recorded everything. There are there are camera recordings everywhere. There are cameras everywhere in there. So in universe, there's a frame narrative sort of set up here. And so, but the Jedi seized the recordings and brought it with them because, you don't want this going public. And the Naboo government wasn't too interested in it and said, yeah, sure, whatever. But Palpatine got a hold of a copy, as did the Jedi Masters. And the Jedi also felt it was important to get this so that they could study Maul's fighting style and learn to fight and defeat him to an extent. And until 10 minutes later, then he bore witness to some... Oh, yeah, I already read that. A horned figure, tattooed and red-skinned as though seized from his worst imaginings. Oh, yeah, real quick. Ferris Olin also was familiar with Darth Maul's look and appearance, which shows that he had seen the recording as a Jedi apprentice at one point. Anyways, the duel started off well. The dark figure did well. However, the advantage, in Talon's opinion, remained firmly with his heroes. That is until they moved towards the energy pit. That was when things changed. Jin tired. The dark figure triumphed. And the heated battle ended, with Talon's eyes widening, his heart tearing as he watched the Dark One knock away Jin's lightsaber. Hit him in the head with a hilt, in a move Talon noted down. Never hurt to consider such techniques no matter how dirty they were. Now this is in the back of Talon's brain. So part of Talon is also analyzing Maul's style throughout this recording. And he stabbed Jin in the heart. The boy stared for some time, his mouth again open, uncomprehending. Tears welled and fell from his eyes as he watched the fateful scene again. Unable to believe it, he watched it over and over and over and over until finally it sank in. The data pad flew across the room as he broke down sobbing like a baby, then and there, as much from rage as from pain. That night he fell asleep to a shower of tears, a storm of agony, as he ignored Yvek's soft calls, Gurion's rough knocks, Malira's commanding and bossy orders to come out, all for nothing. He even stayed in his quarters the next day, rather than attend his classes, full of grief as the news sunk in. He dreamt of a dark figure with a double-sided lightsaber, except there were two differences sometimes. Sometimes it was he himself who was stabbed, other times it was he doing the stabbing, with Jin looking at him in utter betrayal. Now, the next scene is one I just simply put in the notes. There's a bit of, basically, Silly comes to his rescue, and I remember I noted down the dialogue that, Silly basically tells him that Kenobis stick together at one point, and regarding why she came after him, and she's comforting him. And this was something that Talon would not think about until many, many years later. And at the time, he'd think of it in terms of how she's talking about why the bond between him and Obi-Wan is important. But later, he'd realize she's a Kenobi as well. And, yeah. That said, the scene was not fully written. So, if I seem like I'm not making much sense here, it's because we just have a bunch of broken pieces of dialogue and notes here that aren't worth reading out to you all. Anyways, the next day he woke early. Celia was gone. Full of fear, he had just hopped up out of bed to chase after her when he noticed something next to where she had stayed with him all night. A note and a small necklace to wear on cold, lonely nights. Cut it from a warming crystal. Wear it at all times and always be in your heart and your dreams, just as you're in mine. Silly. P.S. Gone to see about Obi-Wan. He needs to cry now, too. Like the baby he is. I think that with the baby he is, that's more Celia's gentle ribbing. You always have to put that in there. Bear in mind, a lot of what Celia says seems harsh on the surface in the novels, but there's an undertone of gentleness and kindness. She may not have liked it. She might not have wanted anyone to think this because she didn't like Qui-Gon. But I think that there were some similarities between the two. Although I always thought she was a bit of a female Mace Windu, which is a scary notion, and it says a lot about Obi-Wan that he'd be attracted to that.
I don't want to comment on that.
Yeah, he's so messed up. Now, the necklace was supposed to play a vital role long term for Talon. And it would also be something that in the dark times he'd cling to, because this would be a physical manifestation of Silly's love for him and his bond with his mother. He hastily slipped on the necklace, vowing to always wear it and never let it anywhere out of his eyesight. Talon scampered off towards Obi-Wan's quarters, taking the turbolift up a few floors to where his quarters were. He found no one there, no answer, and it was empty when he looked inside. Confused, he stepped out only to run into Windu. Talon? Windu's tone was disapproving. What are you doing sneaking into a knight's quarters? An hour when you ought to be asleep. Talon stuttered indecisively, as he had never seen such a sharp look on Master Windu's face. Oh, ye of little faith, how little you know. He's not yet at the age when Mace starts to get harsh with him. The Master was normally gentler with him than even Qui-Gon.
I wanted to see him about Master Jin.
Ah, it was all Windu said, yet it transformed his face from a hard one to a gentle one instantly as he pressed a hand onto the boy's shoulder and knelt down. You were being kind.
Thank you, Master, but he's not there.
I see. Very well. Follow me, Windu ordered as he stood up. Talon followed without question, confused as Windu brought him to one of the meditation halls.
Master, why are we here?
He asked as he gazed about him, seeing some of the older initiates, some Padawans, and a few knights. Meditating. Your heart is at odds, your mind clouded, and your soul in pain. Meditation will assist you. The Force will soothe your feelings. Windu instructed, as he seated himself with the boy letting out a groan before following suit. I know you dislike meditation, but this will be different, Talon.
How so?
Talon asked respectfully. He never allowed impatience to creep into his manner with the revered Master Windu. Not when he was taking time out of his day for him. And also because he wants to live. Okay. Sorry, Windu's just the best, but also the most intimidating Jedi. You will focus on the Force. Now close your mind. Now close your eyes. Jeez, I'm so tired at this point. Windu commanded. Once this was done, he said softly, Now tell me, how do you feel by that river bend in the room of 1,000 fountains?
Nice. Peaceful.
Good. Then focus on that place. Reach out with your feelings for it. Use the Force, Windu suggested patiently. Put the entirety of your being into the water. Let it wash over you, cleanse you, and heal you. Talon, focus upon this. Talon did, and for the first time, he felt his mind cleanse itself, felt himself drifting away. It was different from sleep. It was nicer. It was softer and warm, and it reminded him of Silly. It filled him with peace and awe, but the memory of Silly's protective embrace helped him further. He then took it a step further and allowed the Force to penetrate his memories, his thoughts, towards where his memories of his mother, his dream lady, was. When he opened his eyes, Windu was gone. It had been an hour. He had meditated and found peace for the day. The trance was broken, but the gratitude he felt towards the Master of Ceremonies would last a lifetime. And just as it would be years before, he'd find peace with Jin's death. He no longer felt as though the world was ending. He'd tackle this issue, as he had been trained to do. And he'd start by taking solace in the last words he had shared with Master Qui-Gon. He'd also do something about Obi-Wan, who was avoiding him, he felt. And the next scene was a silly Obi-Wan scene, which I have notes. Talon interrupts, but basically it's a bonding scene. And it basically ends with Silly singing to him an Onderonian tune. I don't know why I decided on Onderonian, but I think it was as a nod to the Jedi Exile, because I was hopped up on KOTOR 2 at the time. But now it cuts to a practice scene. Let's see. It was saber practice time, and the initiates had been given their opponents. His first opponent was a Zabrak, just a year older than him. Powerful, strong, and utterly friendly looking. Talon remembers his name as being Rao Narmuro. A friend of Yvek's, Rao Nar, had... Oh, okay. Sorry, I misread that. Rao Nar Muro. Rao Nar had a tendency to enjoy learning. He excelled at meditation, history, a passion of the Zabraks, and oddly for his species, while he did have a knack for technology as his people often did, he lacked passion for it. But more importantly, Talon struggled with separating his friendly foe from the image in his mind of a taller, crueler Zabrak, that of Qui-Gon's killer. And something wrong, Talon? Raunar stuttered out in concern, visibly disconcerted as he readied his own green blade.
No, nothing,
Talon replied, flicking on his blue training saber with a snap hiss that filled his soul with some peace and joy as it always did. Raunar and him utilized mostly Form 1 Shicho with a basic strike at the knees to start with, on the part of the more aggressively styled form of combat Talon favored. Raunar retaliated by swiping towards his shoulder in a swift feint that shifted onto an aggressive overhead chop which Talon barely blocked. Yeah, okay. The duel goes on for a bit, and you have Yoda interrupts and scolds them in disappointment with them. I'm just skipping a little because, yeah, it's not exactly the most important scene, but Raunar is later to play a much more important role around the time of the Clone Wars. He would become a point-of-view character and a major player in the Galactic Civil War. But that's for a later date, because we'll tell you our plans with him as soon as we kind of get to the Episode 2 era, like closer to Episode 2. Assign you new partners I will. Right, that's you.
Assign you new partners I will. For Raunar, it shall be Gririon.
This elicited a groan from the Zabrak, who dabbed at his neck sweat with a rag. This earned him something of an amused look before Yoda turned his attention upon Talon. He studied him long and hard before he declared,
For Talon, assist his new opponent greatly. Assist his next opponent greatly, he will. To assist his next opponent gently, he will, for it is to be Padawan Skywalker.
This was news. Talon wondered who it could be. He had heard rumors. He hadn't paid much attention. The boy who walked over had blonder hair than him, had bright blue eyes, and a serious face. Okay, now real quick, Anakin was originally blonder than him, but bear in mind that one physical difference is that Anakin's hair kind of turned browner as he got older, as we noticed with Anakin in Episode 3. Talon, though, is always going to keep the golden locks like Billy Zabka did, because Talon kind of physically takes more after Celia in some ways. Had bright blue eyes and a serious face. There was something odd about it. It felt as though it was used to smiling, yet recently had become withdrawn, sad even. Talon's first instinct was to feel sorry for him. He could feel the Force. This boy was powerful, but he was new. This was in itself confusing for him.
Initiate Kenobi your partner will be,
Yoda instructed to Anakin with a sharpness that confused Talon, who felt the air change before the other boy did, as he sensed the powerful presence and warm one of Obi-Wan enter the room. Distracted, he turned to look at him, eager to speak or to make eye contact. Obi-Wan didn't look at him. He avoided his gaze and failed to respond in the Force. His eyes and attention were on Anakin. That hurt. What hurt almost as much was the near hit that Anakin nearly dealt to his distracted opponent. A swift and clumsy strike was struck, as Talon deflected it with some difficulty, more due to distraction than any strength. This Skywalker had no muscle mass to speak of. It was as though he had only begun to be well fed a few days ago. Yeah, because that's the reality. The next blow, and the one after that, were dodged or deflected with ease. Talon had to resist a small smile. It was almost amusing. He tried to direct a friendly grin at his foe, only to frown at the irritated expression. Then he felt guilt again. He wondered as he parried the blue training saber again. Who could have chosen this clumsy boy? Why did they choose him?
Square your shoulders, straighten your back, and hold the lightsaber with both hands when you make that kind of forceful side strike, Padawan.
Obi-Wan barked out suddenly, as he almost surged forward, eyes still on Anakin, who nodded with a grateful look in his direction. Talon paled. He suddenly pieced it together, and as he gaped at Obi-Wan, he felt a buzz of slight pain when something hit his thigh. He looked down. It was the training saber. Anakin sported a pleased look.
Thanks,
No, wait, this is Anakin. Am I stuck with him?
Sure.
Oh, wait, too soon.
Way too soon.
Okay.
Couple decades too soon.
Yeah. Thanks, Master, he said clumsily. Red. That was all Talon saw. As his cheeks flared, his breath hitched, and his fingers tightened. He suddenly lost his connection to the Force then. All he could think was, thief! And in that moment, he let this feeling, this desire for Obi-Wan, this sense of loss, the sense of being robbed, of outrage and humiliation overwhelm him. When they next swung the... Okay, I'm trying to piece together this broken, bloody sentence. When next they swung... Okay, whatever. Talon avoided it again. I'll just skip to that because I can't make heads or tails of the early part of that sentence. Man, I sucked. This time he had a plan. Actually, real quick, thank heavens I've improved since then.
Oh, yes.
You have to fail 100 times when it comes to writing before you get one decent story out of yourself. That's been my experience. Thank heavens my Scottish novel is so much better, along with my short stories. This time he had a plan. He wouldn't just defeat Anakin and wipe that pleased look off his face. He'd destroy him, humiliate him, show him not to take what didn't belong to him. Yeah, here Talon's sounding a little weird and scary. But that's the thing, the dark side does prey on Jedi. And it's preying upon Talon. Talon avoided 2 more strikes without moving his body. He simply inclined his head in one direction, then his body in the other, before he struck back at Talon's own blade, nearly dislodging it from his sweaty palms. Whoops, nearly misread that. A smirk appeared on his face. This seemed to anger Anakin in turn. Not that Talon cared, as he settled on parrying the next blow with one hand, only to end things a heartbeat later, as Anakin threw his body weight into one last strike. Talon jumped to the side, struck at his knees, and tripped him, sending him to the ground.
Anakin!
Obi-Wan rushed forward to Anakin's side in a heartbeat, just as the color cooled from Talon's cheeks.
Are you all right?
I'm fine! Anakin snapped, though he did accept the help with an embarrassed look on his face. It was his first lesson, after all, but he had wanted to seem impressive, not pathetic, especially since he was being put in with the 6-year-old younglings. No, wait, that was I think a mistake on my part, because Talon is several years ahead. This kid was barely Kitster's height, yet he had easily taken him out. Kitster, if you all will remember, is Anakin's best friend from Tatooine.
Initiate Kenobi. Strike in anger, you will not.
Yoda cried out next, his words taking Anakin and Talon by surprise. The sharpness of his correction stung. Just as Anakin's confused look moved between Talon and Obi-Wan, who had risen to his feet after ensuring Anakin was all right. Talon gaped and looked at his feet in shame, aware that he'd done something wrong. Aware of what he had done wrong. Aware of so much. He wanted to cry, wanted to turn back time, not just to undo what he'd done, but to have Obi-Wan back. His Obi-Wan. The kindly, fatherly man who always listened to him, always had a word of logic on his lips, who chuckled at his jokes or had tips for history or politics. Not the stranger who couldn't stand the sight of him. More than that, he wanted Celia in that moment. She was always on his side. She understood him, where this stranger didn't. She liked him, while Obi-Wan hated him now.
You will learn from this. Meditate, you will.
On this.
Meditate on this.
Yeah. Yoda corrected more gently, as he hobbled over to him with a sorry look on his face. He knew and understood why Talon had done what he'd done, even though he wouldn't tolerate it.
Talon.
The voice of reproof was Obi-Wan's.
This was unlike you. Apologize to Anakin now.
There was a steel there that hadn't been there before. Talon did what he always did when confronted by such a situation. He looked Anakin in the eye. The other boy seemed to be just as confused and hurt as he was. But the younger one didn't want to see it. Didn't want to be around it. Didn't want to commiserate with him.
Anakin!
He walked away and fled.
Talon!
Obi-Wan called out. Not that he was listening. He had shown himself a fool and he knew what was coming. what he was going to do and didn't want to make a public show of it, especially in front of Anakin Skywalker. Yeah, at this point, I'll skip the scene, and he ends up running to Celie, who ends up asking, there now, what's wrong? And she's in the middle of preparing for her departure, and she ends up meeting the gaze of Obi-Wan, who's and this is where we get it from Obi-Wan's point of view, and I thought this piece was pretty interesting. It had been confusing for him. At first he had been confused by why Yoda would pit Anakin against Talon. Then he'd thought he'd caught on. Anakin was a novice in need of guidance, and Talon was kind, one of the kindest in his age group, as well as the most talented, if Obi-Wan was to speak frankly. Naturally, Yoda had hoped the younger boy would guide the older one. However, as the duel had progressed, if it could be termed that, he had realized with belated confusion that friendliness was the last thing on his son's mind. He had seen a side of the boy he had never seen before, cruel, sadistic. He had toyed with Anakin, humiliated him, and in that moment, Obi-Wan had felt ashamed and angered by the child. He had always taken pride in Talon, being very like Celia or Qui-Gon in that he was gentle, kind, if a bit loud, yes, but never a child who would spite another. When the spar had ended, though, Anakin seemed humiliated, yes, but then he seemed as upset as Talon, whom Obi-Wan assumed had dealt this blow. Okay, that sentence is completely broken. And you have Yoda who tells him to speak to Talon. And, yeah. And Celia had Talon calmed down, and Yaddle, who was... Okay, so Celia was in the healer's wing with Bant. I made a mistake earlier when I wasn't reading it. I was skimming through because the notes and some of the paragraphs weren't well written. And you have Yaddle. Saddened he is. Candy, the solution to all his problems, it is.
Yaddle.
Yaddle is a Jedi who loved even Anakin. So that when Anakin had caused her death, that broke something in Anakin. That's the first loss he feels. And Anakin kind of reacts to an extent with the same kind of grief he does with his mom later, although he does not flip out with rage. She had a remark from behind Bant. And yeah, we then get Celia who goes, "What did you do?" The hiss that came out of Celia's voice could have come out of the Sith Lord from a week before. It was so icy and angry as she looked up at Obi-Wan with narrowed eyes. He gulped. Suddenly he felt as though he were that 13-year-old boy again, staring at her as she ate an apple. Except back then, she hadn't glared like this. "Speak alone, you three must," Yaddle recommended sagely, even as Talon popped one of her candies, mechanically chewing the candy against his will. He didn't particularly want candy, but the wizened old lady would not accept no for an answer. Her eyes filled him with warmth, told him he wasn't ugly or worthless. It was her gift, he knew. Yaddle could just, with one look, ease everyone's pain. It was because of her innate goodness. And you have Celia tells Obi-Wan, "Follow me to my quarters," and Obi-Wan tries to say, "Okay, I need to talk to Talon." This is mostly in note format, and it doesn't go well. And you have Celia who,
rakes him over the coals.
Yeah, she's not impressed because this is her baby, and you have Celia who Obi-Wan tries to explain to her that, like, you know, I've had to focus on Anakin here. And she ends up, like, I do have, not in note format, but, like, the actual dialogue here. It's one of the only pieces of dialogue to the scene. "He's 6. What makes you think he'll react logically to anything? For Force's sake, Obi-Wan." Because the idea was that Obi-Wan would say, well, logically, I have to focus on Anakin here. And yeah, that doesn't go over well. But anyways, "For Force's sake, Obi-Wan, you ignore him for a week, show up, favor another boy, and then act as though you barely know him. How would you have reacted at twice his age whenever Qui-Gon did that to you? Remember Melita Dawn? Remember when you were kicked out at 13 after you and Brooke fought?" Celia exploded passionately. "He loves you, worships you, has built you up as a god in his head." "But I'm not a god." And yeah, the scene picks up here, and you have Obi-Wan interrupted logically, only for one finger to her eyes. "Are you interrupting me when I'm this mad?" "No." "Good. Now where was I?" "Ah, yes. Builds you up. You know how that Anakin kid you told me about worship Qui-Gon. Well, you're bigger, always have been in Talon's mind than Jin, than Yoda, than Windu, than anyone else in the universe. Greif, you are his universe. You're everything to him, everything he wants. You wonder why he picked on Anakin, why he took satisfaction in his pain. I'll tell you, you were twice as sadistic and cruel at 12, except he's had his entire life ripped out from underneath his feet at half that age. And rather than commiserate, than love, than explain it to him, you persecuted him, bullied him, and outright humiliated him. Silly lectured him furiously. Yeah, the idea is that Obi-Wan would kind of feel helpless and hate that feeling, but he'd then psychoanalyze himself and go, yeah, I was kind of being illogical. I was acting kind of like Qui-Gon Jinn. And yeah, he's like, where Obi-Wan psychoanalyzed himself and was like, well, I was kind of acting like Qui-Gon here and trying to be Qui-Gon Jinn. And the thing about Obi-Wan is he does realize in this scene, as he often does, Qui-Gon's not a very logical man. He was never very logical by nature. And I'm not saying this to criticize Qui-Gon Jinn. I actually love the character. But, yeah. The idea here, I think this was kind of a scene which was beyond my abilities at the time, and I just made notes like, okay, come back to this when you're able to. And we'd have a meltdown and an explosive argument between Talon and Obi-Wan, with Talon just not wanting to do anything to do with Obi-Wan at the time. And then we get Talon, who his coping mechanism here would be that he'd go swimming, because this is basically the Bant in him, and even Obi-Wan, because those two loved swimming in universe. So yeah. Now you have the Talon, who ends up thinking to himself that he's lost everything as he stares down at his reflection in the Room of a Thousand Fountains, adrift with desolation, scared of the future. What if he failed to get a master's attention? What if he failed to become a Jedi? He had no other life, knew no other lifestyle. He'd be tossed out to Agricor. Except they were failing these days. This meant he'd be tossed out onto the streets. The fear, the unknown pushed him to jump into the lake. He needed to swim. It always cooled him. Made him feel better ever since Bant had taught him and Yvek how to do it, when they were almost toddlers. Once this was done, he could see as he was coming out of the water, his Twi'lek friend looking about. Of course, Yvek would come looking for him here. Next to her was Fergus. Full of concern, the serious-minded boy seemed just as frantic as her, but he didn't want to talk to them, didn't want to hurt any more people. He thought of where he could go, where he'd be without them to bother him. Doubtless, Malira and Mikran were near his quarters. Gurion in the mess hall, all his favorite places. He could go to the map room. He loved it there. Or the archives, except they'd already be counting on that, and may have enlisted Truveld or Dara or Ferris to help them out. Talon knew one place, though. Knew one area to go to that nobody knew of, and that was special to him. The bench where he'd sat with frozen food next to Qui-Gon in the market square. It was a good memory, a good place. He wished he could go back to that time and place. Suddenly he remembered how he'd never do that again, because Qui-Gon was dead. It filled him with the urge to howl in agony. He hated this visceral pain in his gut at the loss, the desolation of never seeing Qui-Gon again. Still, the bench was a good idea. Frozen foods like iced mucha always made one feel better when angered. This was advice from Yaddle, and she was rarely wrong, especially where sweets are concerned. After ducking his head underwater to hide, he slipped out of one of these side entrances, took off glancing behind him, worried he'd find them chasing after him.
So far, so good. Ooh!
He grunted as he bumped into someone, knocking her over with a squeal, even as he was knocked to the ground. Watch where you're going, the girl in front of him said sharply. Are you blind?
No.
He shouted back, not paying too much attention to her features as he took off. The girl glanced back at him. He knew her. Another upper year student, 5 years his senior, and dark-haired. The pretty Lana was one of the senior students, tall for her age, but willowy. She had bright brown eyes and looked at him in confusion and irritation. Wait, you forgot your... She called out after him, picking something up off the ground that he had forgotten. Not that he paid her much mind as he dashed off. Now, Lana is a character who appears in Jedi Apprentice as a newborn girl. She is picked up as to be taken off to Jedi training from the planet of Kigan, I think it is. And it's Qui-Gon who takes her to the temple. So the idea here was to tie her in with Obi-Wan and the Kenobi universe and turn her into a great Jedi. On the other hand, Talon, as you might have noticed, has a habit of running off before he thinks. He runs before he thinks, leaps before he thinks, and everything. He's very impulsive. Briefly, he thought he heard Fergus, but he put it out of his mind as he hurried off outside and down into the streets. Having snuck out of the temple numerous times, Talon knew the way well, particularly the straight route to the Senate. The trouble was he had forgotten his credits, so he couldn't take an air taxi, but he could make it to the market in about an hour or two. It was no sweat, he thought. He spent some time there, able to convince a kindly female Rhodian into giving him a bit of the icy treat for free. He felt guilty, but she would not allow him to pay. She told him stories of her own children for an hour or so while he ate, before she encouraged him to head back home, giving him 5 credits to pay for the fare. That's actually quite a bit of money for it. She basically gave him the equivalent of $50. On his way back, though, he felt better. His stomach was no longer nauseated. His eyes no longer had tears threatening to come out, and his burning shame and anger had deserted him, leaving him feeling guilty for having destroyed his friendship with Obi-Wan. Because bear in mind, he did shout at Obi-Wan. I'm not sure how I was going to do that, because I had a few ideas noted down, but none of them seemed very good, so yeah. It was as Celia had said. He loved him, worshipped him. The thought of never being able to see him again, or being replaced, made him feel disgusting. Talon knew then that if he had been replaced, it wasn't just because of Anakin, but because of his own actions, his own anger, his own immaturity. He had acted first, hurt others first, to make himself feel better. He didn't deserve to be a Jedi, if he could behave in such a manner. Now, here's the thing, real quick. I think I was thinking that with this scene, this is when Talon's kind of turned off from the dark side to a large extent. Or at least, wanting to hurt someone else to make himself feel better. Anakin never fully overcomes this instinct. Talon has the same instinct, but because he did it, he has the same flaw in a way as Obi-Wan Kenobi does, except the difference is Obi-Wan wanted to please Qui-Gon Jinn too much, Talon wants to please Obi-Wan Kenobi too much. The difference is, I would argue, in some ways, Talon's destined for more pain than Obi-Wan in that regard. It was just as he went to enter the temple that he caught sight of someone flitting from the shadows in a clumsy, ill-trained manner, except this person wasn't headed for the market square. He was headed downwards, off the off-beaten path of the main road that lay before the temple. Squinting in the dim lighting, it took Talon a minute before he realized who it was. It was Anakin Sky something. Yeah, Talon didn't pay attention to his surname. Talon watched him head off down this sentence, where he wasn't allowed. He was headed down past the hidden Kenobi and straight for the route that led to the lower city, to where some of the gangs operated. Now, real quick, let's be honest, Anakin has no talent for subtlety or stealth. That's a fact. That's consistent across the board with all his appearances pre-2008. The difference is Talon has a knack for stealth, inherited from his father and mother. So, yeah, and from basic Jedi training. The difference is Anakin never cared for stealth. He was never very good at it. Let's be honest. I like Anakin, but it's like, no, he's not good at this. Well, you see him later as Darth Vader. He doesn't need stealth. But Talon, on the other hand, had a knack for it, despite his own mighty midichlorian count. Where is he going? Talon wondered as he followed him with his eyes, confused. Glancing back at the temple, he considered briefly going in to report Anakin. It would surely get him kicked out. This would leave Obi-Wan free. But I already burnt that bridge in grand style, as Celia would put it. He fought miserably before he brightened up a little, out of thought. Now I'm only going to read his thoughts here just to speed it along, if that's okay, Dan.
That's fine.
I've only been to the lower city once, with Fergus, Gurion, Milira, Raunar, and Yvette. Imagine if I were to do it alone. Quite the adventure. After all, if Anakin could do it, I could do it too. This competitive flame in his chest started up as he gave chase to Anakin, following him without being seen. What an amateur, he soon thought, as he watched Anakin maneuver towards the junk pile section, where junk droid parts and ship parts littered the area. So intent was the 6-year-old on Skywalker that he barely paid any attention to his surroundings. He listened raptly as Anakin spoke fluent Huttese to one of the merchants, who snorted a reply, looming over him. Not that this intimidated the other boy in the slightest. Talon listened raptly. He saw Anakin point to a droid arm, growl back, and meet the man's gaze fearlessly. Now, real quick. In Jedi Quest, it's shown that Anakin liked to sneak off, grab droid parts, and sneak them into the temple and start building things as a coping mechanism. So that when Anakin would think about his mother, or Padme, and Barriss Offee, who was to later forge a strong bond of friendship with Anakin, bear in mind, the cartoon is inaccurate. She's not Ahsoka's age, she's Anakin's age. And the thing is, if her and Anakin shared a very, very close friendship. But the thing is, if she's not around, or to an extent Anakin didn't want to trouble her, for the most part, Anakin wanted to work on something to get his brain off, his mom or Padme or Qui-Gon Jinn. So, and this is where Anakin had a lot of insecurities. He thought he'd be a problem to Obi-Wan. And Obi-Wan thought it was kind of cute that he was building stuff. And was like, you know what? It's a useful skill. I'll encourage him. But the problem is Obi-Wan did not see the real issue and did not crack down on it. And later when he did, he kind of came off as a jerk because he overdid it. He overcorrected. So anyways, very important habit of Anakin's. A Wookiee was called forward, and he failed to also intimidate the boy, who switched to basic. I need the arm, and you aren't doing anything with it. 3 credits is a good price, Anakin was saying, just as a shriek made him and the lowlives he was dealing with jump. Sneaking up on Talon, one of the lowlives had grabbed him, picked him up, remarking as he did, "Look what we have here, a little spy. Bet he's from the Kex, from down the street."
No, I'm not. I don't know anything about the Kex or the Tulkars. But if you don't put me down, I'll cut you up. I'm a Jedi.
Now, this shows that Talon actually does know about them. He's lying. Not very well. Talon threatened as he reached down for his lightsaber, only to realize in a flash of horror that it was missing. It was then that he remembered Lana, how she had called out after him, tried to tell him something. She must have meant my training saber, he realized as it dawned on him just how close he was to danger, as he struggled against the Barabel who had picked him up. Its hideous face dangerously close to his. I hope this isn't it. Put him down, Anakin commanded sharply in a dangerous tone. Make me, kid, was the snorted reply from the Barabel. Do you honestly think the Kex are smart enough to send a couple of kids to spy on you? But he just said, of course he knows about you guys. You're that awesome. I'd worry if he didn't know, if he played dumb or something. Do you really want to waste your time and energy on us, especially since we are Jedi? Anakin spoke up, interrupting him smoothly as the merchant piped up his view on the matter. As if you're a Jedi. They always carry those beam sabers of theirs or something, or whatever they're called. You mean like this? Anakin replied innocently as he flicked on his blue blade. The cerulean lights showed in the darkness how pale they were at the sight of the lightsaber. Greif, scramble! They are Jedi! Run for it! Cried out the third one. I've already lost one thumb. I don't want to lose another one. I think that was supposed to be a nod to an older Obi-Wan Jedi Apprentice. Not Jedi Apprentice, but like maybe that Darth Maul book. Because I think Obi-Wan sliced off a guy's thumb when the guy tried to, kill him. Talon was tossed at Anakin's feet. Brushing himself off, he stuck his tongue out at the retreating cowards, just as Anakin returned his weapon to his waist.
Thanks,
Talon mumbled sheepishly, after making sure he wasn't injured. No problem, Anakin retorted evenly, a look of cold amusement lighting up in his eyes. Where's your lightsaber? What with how you were so good with it? Talon bent his head down a little, as he felt his cheeks flush bright red.
I lost it.
Anakin didn't say anything. Instead, he made to leave, a note of satisfaction on his face and in his steps, even as he returned to being all business.
Where are you going?
Those thugs will be back with greater numbers. They're dumb, but even they'll realize eventually that we're not really a match for them. Anakin retorted, all iciness.
Wait, what about your droid part?
Talon called out as he raced over after picking up the part. Embarrassed, he added hurriedly,
Why'd you come to get this rather than go ask the temple for parts?
I prefer to get the parts myself, Anakin snapped, still not warming up to him. However, Talon was fascinated by that answer.
Why? Our parts are better.
What you don't get for yourself doesn't rightfully belong to you. Anakin lectured him haughtily.
But Jedi don't have possessions.
Yeah, well, I believe we should have them, was the short answer.
What a weird belief. I think Siri thinks like that too.
Talon remarked, rubbing his chin in a gesture he had come to do, imitating Obi-Wan a little. Listen, I know you don't like me, so why are you cozying up to me all of a sudden? Anakin grumbled as Talon traipsed after him.
Because I treated you like that and you just saved my life.
Talon confessed, his cheeks crimson as he looked down to the ground in shame.
I humiliated you in front of Obi-Wan and you helped me. I just wanted to thank you.
Oh, Anakin said, deflating visibly, as he seemed to consider this seriously.
Also, here's your part.
The younger boy offered the arm, and another part he had surreptitiously picked up.
And a logic circuit if you needed to.
Dear Lord! Anakin's such a bad influence on Talon. He's turning him into a thief, a common pickpocket. Like I said, Talon's stealthy. Anakin did not have the talent for pickpocketing. Talon, apparently, has turned Jedi training to pickpocketing and common burglary.
Where did they get that from?
Bilbo Baggins.
His mother or his father?
Bilbo Baggins. Now he's ready to go face Smaug. Thanks, Anakin murmured uncertainly. You know, you don't have to be all, like this with me.
But you were amazing.
Gosh.
But you were amazing. You stared down to a 3 even though you suck.
Talon blurted out, amazed and awed by his peer's courage. Thanks. Wait, what do you mean I suck? The anger was back in Anakin's eyes, an expression as he scowled.
Well, you can't fight,
Talon retorted, only to hurriedly add.
But that's just because you're new and all.
Thanks for the reminder, was the next grunt as they neared a respectable street. Now what?
We have to go back,
Talon said. But I need more parts, Anakin replied plaintively.
But the outer security cams are about to activate their infrared scope, so if you don't go now, you'll be caught on camera by all of the temple security, droids, officers, and Jedi.
Talon pointed out logically. Oh, I didn't know that. How'd you know that?
I've snuck out a few times,
Talon admitted before he added in horror.
But don't tell anyone about that.
Who would I tell? Anakin replied distantly, sounding lonely then.
Well, Obi-Wan, obviously.
Talon said as though it were the most obvious thing in the universe. Talon snorted in response, as if he wouldn't get anything. Anakin murmured to himself, distant then for a moment, before he asked, I've noticed since a while ago, you call Master Obi-Wan just Obi-Wan. Why is that?
Because he told me to.
Talon replied with a short laugh.
And was my best friend out of the senior Padawans and Knights. Him and Siri.
Right. Who is he to you? Are you two related? Anakin asked sharply now, eyes piercing the boy who squirmed a little next to him as they walked.
He's my uncle, I guess. I'm not sure. Nobody thinks about it or asks, but I really liked him, and he was nicer than even Master Qui-Gon.
No, he wasn't, Anakin growled back, startling Talon. No one, other than my mom, was kinder than Qui-Gon Jinn.
I loved Qui-Gon too. I just really liked Obi-Wan. He was special.
Talon mumbled sadly, eyes drifting down. What do you mean, was? Anakin wondered. Blood makes all the difference. He then added bitterly, did he want to train you?
We promised when I was younger. I really wanted to be with him. Forever, maybe. I don't know. I don't think he liked me.
He likes me anymore.
He likes me anymore.
Talon replied, feeling tinier than ever. Yeah, I only corrected Dan there. That's actually not his mistake. That's mine because there was a typo here, and I just wanted Dan to give you guys the corrected version. There's a lot of typos. And so, like, Dan and I stuttering a little over some of the sentences because there's a lot of typos. It was like 15 years ago. Here, Anakin shifted. Something seemed to change. Suddenly he didn't seem so mean, so threatening. Rather, he seemed gentle, as though he were going to cry too. I didn't know. I'm sorry. But surely he would want to train you. You're related.
But he didn't,
Talon argued back, just as they arrived on the steps. Wanting to change the subject, he spoke up.
Where are you from?
Tatooine.
Jabba's planet?
Talon said incredulously.
How'd you survive there?
I was a slave.
Sorry.
You didn't know, Anakin grunted, only to consider something. Sorry for getting Master Obi-Wan instead of you.
You didn't know.
Talon parroted back with a small smile. He then confessed.
I hope he doesn't hate me.
Why would he? I told him I
hated him.
Yeah, that was what was supposed to result from that argument. I can't remember how we were gonna. Well, I just wrote down notes for how to do the scene. Not like this was the end goal that Talon would have told Anakin he hated him. Talon mumbled back, feeling small, as Anakin all but glowered at him in disapproval. Why would you ever say that? Do you? Skywalker demanded of him harshly, suddenly as severe as Windu or Silly could be.
No, I don't know.
My mom used to say, never say something you don't mean. Mean every word, because you never know if they'll be the last ones you share with someone. Anakin replied, signaling for him to enter the temple. There was a longing in his voice as he spoke of his mother. And suddenly Anakin was no stranger, no hero who had saved Talon, but a kindred spirit.
You knew her? What was she like? Was she pretty? Was she kind? She sounds like it.
The stream of words wouldn't stop pouring out of his mouth. She was worn, but perfect. Kind, Anakin confessed, looking as though he were hiding tears. He swallowed them audibly.
You miss her,
Talon stated, simply, reaching over to rub Anakin's arm unconsciously. The older boy jumped, only to relax a little. A look of startled gratitude and familiarity there. It was a gesture Jin had done for him once. It filled him with warmth. He in turn could feel some connection here. They had both lost Qui-Gon, both needed Obi-Wan, and both felt lost in the galaxy. Now, real quick, this gesture on Talon's part that's instinctive, it's because, as noted earlier, Talon has picked up a lot of habits that Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan have. Little kids, I noticed, tend to do this with their adult figures, especially their fathers and grandfathers. When I say little kids, I mean young boys. Talon suddenly reminded Anakin of Kidster, and the temple suddenly felt like home to the lost, freed boy. Yeah, he admitted hoarsely, certain that rather than laugh or hurt him, Talon would show compassion. He wouldn't understand, Anakin thought, as he didn't know his mother. He had been taken from her when he was too young to understand the loss.
I understand. I miss mine,
Talon replied sincerely.
I think of her a lot.
You do? Anakin asked. Now he was the one speaking in a wondering tone.
She used to sing to me. She held me close, too. She'd always tell me stories,
She'd also tell me
stories, which is why when I think of her, I feel so lonely. I usually go to Siri or Obi-Wan. They made me feel better,
Talon explained shyly, only to try and cheer up the other boy.
Hey, Anakin, can I ask you something?
What? The suspicion was back, though slightly weaker than before.
Mind if I help you with your lightsaber training?
Talon offered kindly, wanting to do something for the other boy.
I know Obi-Wan goes on missions a lot. Same with Siri, and I did kind of ruin your first class. So if you want, I could help. It's my apology.
Oh, and real quickly, just as a reference to the Kidster comment earlier, I think Kidster was supposed to be a bit of the inspiration for Talon in terms of personality from episode 1. So, just to let you guys know that. This offer threw Anakin off. It startled him, as he had not expected such a kindly offer. As he studied the other boy, he suddenly found himself reminded of Obi-Wan. But Talon was different, louder, more curious, and far more vulnerable. And on top of that, the boy had also felt the separation he had from his mother. He was a younger boy, and it was apparent to Anakin he was already beginning to admire and be fascinated by Anakin a little. When did my comfort zone get so small? Anakin asked himself, shocked. Just a few days ago, he'd have leaped at the chance to make another friend, and yet here he was reluctant to form a friendship and attachment. So earnest was Talon then, that a smile made its way to Anakin's lips. It felt good, he realized, to be liked, or to have someone in his debt, someone eager to be kind to him. Sure, he said with no small amount of gratitude.
Great. First lesson, don't stab yourself in the foot,
Talon joked as he came to a stop and paled. Anakin followed his gaze and understood his nervousness. It was Obi-Wan.
Anakin, Talon,
Obi-Wan said, having been lying in wait for them in front of the latter's quarters.
Where have you two been? I've been worried sick.
Both boys felt embarrassed, felt their cheeks heat up, and felt pleased that he had worried over them, as both craved his love in their own way, for their own reasons. Sharing a look, they both struggled with an answer as the older Kenobi noticed the droid parts in Anakin's arms. Realization, then concern, marred his blue gaze as he asked,
What happened? I followed Anakin.
Talon admitted at once, ready to defend his newfound friend.
He just needed some stuff for a project. Is this true?
Obi-Wan asked Anakin sharply, shooting a worried look at his son as he tried to swallow his instincts to growl at Anakin not to drag Talon out of the temple at such an hour. Who knew what could have happened to him? Kind of. I didn't know he was following me. Anakin informed him guiltily, unsure of what to say or what not to say in this moment. I didn't ask for him to follow me.
I left the market square, then on my way back ran into Anakin.
I left for the market square.
I left for the market square, then on my way back I ran into Anakin.
Yeah, that time it was you misreading it. Talon added, not sure if he should be pleased or worried that Obi-Wan looked so stressed and worried.
Very well. Anakin, head to your quarters. I'll deal with you in the morning. We'll talk over the morning meal while Talon and I talk now.
Now, in the early years of Anakin's apprenticeship to Obi-Wan, Obi-Wan always ate his breakfast with Anakin. And it's actually a pretty moving and beautiful thing that he did there, refusing to eat with almost anyone else, but sharing breakfast with Anakin in private to focus purely on the boy, aware that Shmi always did this for Anakin. It was a side of Obi-Wan that was very kind, but it's a side that Anakin was later to deny. Oh, Obi-Wan wasn't that kind to me. At one point, whenever he'd feel jealous of Obi-Wan or resentful of him, and Obi-Wan, but then later in Episode 3, in I think the novel, it's referenced that Anakin had to suppress when he was Vader some of the memories of how, admittedly, Obi-Wan. Now, where Shmi was often mentally distracted when eating breakfast with him, thinking about the day and whatnot, Obi-Wan would not do that and would focus on him purely on Anakin. So that in some ways, Anakin didn't want to think about the fact that in some ways, Obi-Wan was kinder to him than Jin or Shmi. But he needed to suppress this because, he needed to be Darth Vader and be a psychopath. I'm just saying. Yeah, yes, sir. I mean, master. Anakin assented with a slight dip of his head. As he turned to leave, he shot Talon an uncertain look before he said, "We'll talk later."
Sure.
Talon replied just as uncertainly. Once he was gone, the younger boy turned to look up at his hero with expectant eyes, unsure of what was going to happen in 2 seconds. He felt dread gathering in his gut as he waited, though. Yeah, we get an apology scene, which is very mushy. I just want to skip because for time constraints. And I like the confession from Talon during it. We'll just give you the highlights.
Okay, I just wish we could be like in the ancient times when you could take on 2 Padawans. Then the 3 of us would be a team.
Here, this would not leave Talon's mind for a long time, to an extent. But you got to bear in mind, it's Yoda who abolished that rule. Because, he's Yoda. And I'm going to actually sound harsh here. He's incompetent. Because Yoda was incompetent. And this might sound harsh, but I actually think Yoda was probably the worst Grandmaster in history outside of Nomi Sunrider and Vrook Lamar. And I rank him really low because you read the prequel novels and you go, what a royal mess Yoda made. And I know I'm harsh here, but I don't care. I'm going to be harsh at this point. I'm not in the mood to be very nice. And you get Talon and Obi-Wan exchanging, friendship here, and it's a very nice scene. Anyways, and I'm not reading it because, like I said, I'm tired, I'm hungry, and I wanted to end this video. The next day, when the younglings gathered for training, they did so with some surprise at the sight of Talon greeting Anakin cheerfully, the latter reacting with shy kindness with shy warmth in return. Man, I'm tired. The boy tried introducing Anakin to his friends, with Yvette showing some reluctance to welcome him, oddly enough. It's because Yvette doesn't want to share Talon here, where we start to see her own darker side. Gurion was more curious, like Talon, than anything else, with Talon being humiliated when a particular raven-haired initiate showed up with Talon's training saber in hand. "It would appear we have a guest," Sindralig remarked as he grinned a little. I can't remember if you did, Sin, or I did. I don't think it's particularly important.
Yeah.
Not a particularly mischievous man. This moment sparked it in him. Oh, right, I think who are we going to apprentice Lana to? I can't quite remember. I'm here to return a training saber, Lana explained quickly with a bow as she stepped inside towards Talon, who felt his cheeks heat up in pure embarrassment. Oh, that's right! We were going to apprentice her, I think, to Jaren Mulm. Oh. We had talked about that a while back. Oh my gosh! Sorry, it just clicked into my brain who we were going to apprentice her. Yeah, sorry.
It's been years.
Yeah, and we didn't actually write this explicitly down. Holy cow, like, you know, the things you forget, and then you suddenly remember. Well, around that time, our father passed, so, like, of course, that was kind of also clouding our brains a little. Yes, I'm going to admit that a lot of the ideas and plans we had made for this Star Wars fanfic was around that time, and, yeah. Here you go. Next time, keep a better hold of it. Just a tip.
I'll bear that in mind.
Bear that in mind.
I'll bear that in mind,
he murmured before she gave him a mocking look and took off. He felt like a fool. He didn't like her, he decided. She had mocked him. She had humiliated him. But then he decided, just as with Anakin, why let that color him forever? Just because I don't like someone today doesn't mean I shouldn't like them forever. He thought, pondering forgiveness, that difficult old lesson, one he longed to learn as well as Yvek had mastered. Once more he resolved to do it. This time he'd apply Master Windu's meditation advice and meditate on his feelings regarding Lana, on Anakin, and strive for a better understanding of the living force. And when time came to select Anakin's partner, to everyone's worry, Talon volunteered. This time, though, there was no incident. Instead, he gave advice mostly on how to hold the lightsaber, where to grip it, and how to properly swing it. By the end of the class, Anakin was starting to swing it faster. He was a fast learner and was already figuring out several of the 6-year-old katas, but it would be some time before he caught up, maybe even a few months.
Would you care to meet my friends and eat with us?
Talon offered when it was time to eat later. No, I'm good, Anakin replied stoically, selecting a distant seat from everyone else. You go sit with them.
Maybe later,
Talon decided, thinking him lonely, if he were to sit by himself.
Why would you be good on your own?
Because I wouldn't be pestered, Skywalker mused as he eyed the shorter male. Instead, though, he asked his own question. Why are you being so nice? Is it because you feel guilty?
It's not that. It's just, you seem lonely. You could use a friend, and I just wanted to help,
was the answer. This seemed to perk Anakin up.
Would you like that?
It took Anakin a moment to answer. His throat had tightened with emotion. After Qui-Gon had died, he had felt like a burden to those around him. These feelings had worsened with the knowledge he had not been accepted by Obi-Wan by choice after meeting the younger Kenobi. As long as you don't cry, he taunted a little, wincing mentally at his own tone and his own words, instantly wishing to take them back. Fortunately, Talon didn't take them all that badly.
Hey, I'm not McCran. I don't cry that easily. It was just a few times.
Maybe it won't be so bad. He's innocent, but maybe it'll be like having kids stir again, Anakin told himself hopefully, which is how they reluctantly formed their bond of friendship, with Talon initially treating Anakin with great curiosity. He would try to get him and his friends to get on, but it was difficult. Yvek didn't take to sharing Talon with Anakin as eagerly as the former had expected. Gurion didn't mind him, same with Malera. Both of them seemed to kind of like him. Mikran was initially scared of him, then didn't like him, then grew fond of him, more because of how rocky the two boys had begun their friendship, and her knowledge of Obi-Wan's place in Talon's heart. And then there was Fergus. In some ways, he proved the most adamant against Anakin. But that was a battle for another day, and a tale for another time. Hope you all liked this video. It's too long, I know. But don't forget to smash that like and that subscribe button, and stay tuned for the next fanfic video.